You're listening to You Don't Know Jack, a laid-back spot for real, unfiltered talk about the NFL and NBA. I'm Jackson. I drop new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, breaking down the biggest stories, the wildest headlines, and takes you won't hear on those cookie-cutter sports shows. This isn't just hot takes for clicks. It's straight talks, no agendas, and no yelling just to go viral. If you're tired of the same old debate shows, this one's for you. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. If you want more, tap in on X at AJU Sports and All Jacked Up Sports for TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Let's get into today's episode. All right, hello and welcome everybody to another episode of You Don't Know Jack. It is August 6th, a wonderful Wednesday here. We got a lot of news, so thank you for joining me today on today's show. We have a lot to talk about, so let's dive in to our full graphic rundown, aka the chalkboard, and let's see what's going around the news cycle in sports today. I do cover a little bit more of Cowboys in terms of NFL, so we're going to talk Cowboys and Rams. They had a combined practice yesterday, and so I want to talk about that, key takeaways, and then kind of how both of these teams fit into the whole NFC. That's going to be our second segment, teams to look out for in the NFC, especially come, playoff contenders. Not a prediction segment just yet. We'll get into a bigger one, maybe a whole episode just dedicated to my predictions for the whole NFL season. And then we'll talk about the NFL and ESPN. They broke news headlines making a deal in terms of their entertainment properties and equity and whatnot. So we'll finish off today's episode with talking about the NFL and ESPN deal. But first, let's get into our first segment of today's show, that being the Cowboys and Rams joint practice. Now, NFL teams, they have joint practices all the time. All the time. It's nothing new. The Cowboys and Rams do this every single year. It's not really anything too shocking, but this is the first one under Brian Schottenheimer, the new head coach for the Dallas Cowboys. And, it's kind of the first feel of this potentially new team, right? Obviously, still have the Micah Parsons situation. He didn't practice. He showed up, but he didn't practice. And then you have some other guys that, we're potentially looking at. It's a first full offseason in a while for CD and Dak Prescott. They showed out in this joint practice. But that was, kind of a given, right? We weren't too... are they going to click? No, they obviously click. They obviously have great chemistry. It's more of the other guys that we are waiting to see from. And so the biggest question mark offensively for this team is going to be the run game. And one of the big spotlights from the practice was how the run game for the Cowboys was going to show. Like, how was it going to present itself if it was going to be any different? And, the Cowboys didn't make any moves in terms of getting, big name running backs in free agency. Javonte Williams was there, or they signed him. Miles Sanders they signed. They drafted, Jadon Blue out of Texas. But still, the run game did not look great. Schottenheimer said, they gave us fits. We had some communications errors. The run game wasn't great. So, it's unfortunate to see we might have a bad run game again for the second season in a row, which is just absolutely crazy because you'd think you'd address that in free agency. But no, our GM doesn't believe in signing free agents, or at least big name free agents. So this is going to be one tough part about this offense is going to be the run game. A lot of people on Twitter are hyping Jadon Blue as being this, fast tailback, kind of reinvigorating this run game for the Cowboys, and we'll have to see. There's still some parts of this offensive line that are still being figured out. I don't believe Tyler Smith played too much yesterday in the practice. Tyler Guyton is dealing with a knee injury. He's still out, so they're still figuring some things out as well on the offensive line. I'm pretty sure one of their guys just took snaps for the first time 300 days. 300 days? Are you serious? What are we doing with our depth chart? But regardless, they had problems. Also, the Rams have a great defense, and it's also August 5th when this took place. We're a month out of the season. Obviously, the players to show something, but as we transition to kind of the offense as a whole, Brandon Schottenheimer kind of kept it very vanilla. He kept the offense very vanilla, didn't expand the playbook too much. But that didn't stop Joe Milton from showing up a little bit. He looked sharp early. A lot of people were kind of glazing him for his 60, 70-yard deep ball. That was kind of the play of practice for the Cowboys. But he left with an injury. He seems to be okay. So Joe Milton, I mean, they traded a 4th-round pick for him. He seems pretty all right for a backup quarterback, especially with Dak Prescott's injury history, missing some games. He might actually get some playing time this season, which obviously is not the worst case scenario, but definitely a plan B rather than your plan A. Then Devontae Turpin getting involved in the offense. So another question mark for this Cowboys offense is going to be who is their wide receiver 3? Who is going to step up, right? And if you look at this wide receiver core before the George Pickens trade, wasn't the greatest core in the NFL. You get George Pickens, and we'll talk about his impact with CeeDee Lamb in a second, but the third guy was, really up in the air, and a lot of people are saying Devontae Turpin can fill that role, or the Jalen Tolberts can fill that role, and we'll have to see. Turpin got some great plays on Tuesday, so I'm excited to see what he has, under his belt. What can he show us as Cowboys fans? Obviously, I followed him around when he was at TCU, great special teams playmaker, as we know as Cowboys fans, but he kind of got involved a little bit later into the season on the offensive side. So, it wasn't too much with Dak Prescott. It was more with, Cooper Rush and some other guys as well. So I'm excited to see how he translates more into an offensive role in this offense, because if he can really solidify himself as that third receiver, this is going to be a very dangerous offense, and I'm excited to see it, at least in the pass game, because obviously the run game has issues. But speaking of George Pickens, the big wide receiver 2, 1B, like people like to call it, him and CeeDee Lamb both showed glimpses of what we can expect this season yesterday. Pickens was more of a beast in the red zone, and Lamb stood out more in terms of creating separation and getting more yards, which is exactly how I saw this playing out. CeeDee Lamb's going to be the guy, your every down receiver, first option, slants, drag routes, just trying to get open, get some yards, short yards, maybe some shots down the field. But George Pickens is going to be your deep shot guy and your red zone target, because both these guys have great, catch radiuses, but George Pickens might be a little bit better in that category, especially as we get towards, the red zone. CDs might be getting more attention, so you see George Pickens might have the more favorable matchup, and with his skill set, that could be a very deadly duo. And I'm expecting big things from Dak Prescott this season with those two guys really leading the wide receiver core. And so overall for the Cowboys, the defense didn't look great either. The defense isn't going to be great this year. That's going to be this team's Achilles heel. It's just their defense isn't going to be good enough for them to win games. Even with Micah Parsons, I don't believe this defense is anything special, which is a little bit disappointing for sure. We'll have to see how Micah really, impacts this team if he misses a couple games and then he comes back and really shows his value to this team. He's valuable. I'm not saying he's not, but there's also a level to how much Micah Parsons can actually impact the game, right? Great pass rusher, helps out the cornerbacks, the DBs, right? But if he can't do that, how is he really impacting this team? We'll have to see if he returns. Jerry Jones came out yesterday or today about he's not very confident that, Micah will be ready on the field for week 1, which is just such an eye roll. That is such an important game. Not that I'm saying they're going to win it. They're probably going to lose against the Eagles on that Thursday night. However, it would be nice to at least keep that game close, because if they get blown out again, confidence is just going to be, same as last season, at the end of last season when they got smoked by the Philadelphia Eagles. And so as we take a look at some of the Rams offensive notes, Matthew Stafford wasn't there yesterday. He's still dealing with an injury. Jimmy Garoppolo played several, snaps yesterday as he's their backup quarterback. He was connecting with Devontae Adams, which is actually kind of funny because I think they played together in Las Vegas. But you saw the offense for the Rams kind of clicking, passing, running. They do have some questions at left tackle, which, they're still dealing with some injuries there. They're trying to figure out. They have a deep tight end depth chart. So this Rams team is going to be very good. I'm not too worried about the Rams offensively, defensively. Obviously, if Matthew Stafford's not there, that creates a big, big problem because Jimmy Garoppolo, I don't want to say game manager because that's such a lame, you know, adjective to place on a quarterback. Oh, you manage the game. Well, they should be. They're the freaking quarterback. But I can see the Rams really being limited in terms of their passing game, which I still think is their bread and butter. Kyren Williams just got a new extension, a 3-year, $33 million deal. He's obviously one of the best backs in the NFL, most underrated running back in my opinion. And so it's going to be interesting to see if Matthew Stafford is going to miss any time. I don't believe so. They're taking his time with him. So we're going, that's a big question mark for the Rams as a whole. But for these two teams, I think they have drastically different expectations, or at least I have different expectations of both these teams. I think the Rams had one of the better off seasons. I expect them to win their division, I would say. Definitely have to take a deeper look, but I would say I haven't looked at the betting odds or anything like that. But I would have to say they are clearly the best team in that division. And then for the Cowboys, potentially they could be battling for the second spot in that division, which is just kind of sad because a couple years ago you were looking, oh, this team could potentially run this division. No, Philadelphia has come back and kind of taken control of the division, which is kind of a shame, but it's not the end of the world. So for these two teams, obviously, like I said, it's early August, about a month away from the season starting. Both these teams have stuff to work on, the Cowboys more so. And so is this the beginning of the end for the Cowboys? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below after this joint practice. They play their first preseason game on Saturday. I'll be watching that. I'll give my thoughts on Monday about what I liked and what I saw. Hopefully Joe Milton will be able to go because, preseason you're not necessarily going to see a CD or a Dak play, but, with kind of the skill repertoire of Joe Milton, you would like to see him kind of put on a show a little bit, or at least show off the arm and have some highlight plays to keep you entertained, because preseason football is boring. It is, especially once you get past halftime and the starters are kind of out of the game. It doesn't really matter. So that's my thoughts on the Cowboys and Rams joint practice. Let me know if you guys think this means a lot or means nothing. Let me know in the comments below. But as we transition to our next segment, talking about how the Rams and the Cowboys really fit into this NFC playoff picture, we're going to just take a look at kind of the teams in general. This isn't a prediction segment, but it is a segment just to have my general thoughts before I do any heavy research and how I really think this season it will play out. So for our YouTube listeners and watchers, we're going to flip over to the NFL website, kind of a nice little depth chart. But this is a nice little time to plug in the YouTube page, right? Make sure to go over and subscribe to our YouTube, All Jacked Up Sports. This is where I post our video or visual of our podcast, where you can follow along as I'm going through these NFL standings and division rankings. But also, I post some short form content. If you really want all the things from myself and this podcast, going to All Jacked Up Sports is really your one-stop shop. But also, there is some of our other social medias, such as our Instagram, All Jacked Up Sports as well. That really gets more personal, some more content for me on the sports side in terms of what it takes to create a podcast like this. And then also just some of my fun little tangents that I go on X as well. That's at AJU Sports. I literally was just going through and tweeting after I had, a little bit of caffeine, and I just went on an absolute spree of replying to tweets. So make sure to go over and follow me on Twitter, because you'll get the notifications of when podcasts are live, new videos, and all my short form content as well. But let's get back to the show, and let's talk about, firstly, the NFC West. We'll start at the bottom here with the Los Angeles Rams, Seattle Seahawks, Arizona Cardinals, and San Francisco 49ers. Now, the 49ers and Rams, both playoff teams last year. No, just kidding. Sorry, the 49ers had a down year last year, duh. And so the Rams won the division, 7-10 record. Seattle just missed it with a 10-7 record as well. So I expect the Rams to have more control over this conference, or over this division, I should say. Seattle with a new quarterback and Sam Darnold, that could play very interesting. Second-year head coach as well. They just traded DK Metcalf to the Steelers, so they have some new receivers. Cooper Kupp now there. So it's, for the Seattle Seahawks, it's more of a question mark than anything else for this team. I almost want to say I feel more confident in the Arizona Cardinals than I do the Seahawks this year, just based off familiarity with the team. Kyler Murray's back. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s in his second year. He's looking for a bounce back year. They won 8 games last year when a lot of teams predicted this to be the worst team last year. At home they were 6-3. They really struggled on the road last year with a 2-6 record. In the division they went 500, which it's a moderately tough division for sure. This upcoming year I don't expect too much of a difference, especially since we're saying San Francisco is going to take a step back, which we don't know the Brandon Ayuk, how he's progressing. I haven't done too much research on the 49ers as a whole. But when he went down, that kind of derailed their season with injuries and whatnot. They only won 6 games last season. So do I expect them to bounce back? Yes, but not to the level of potentially winning the division. Brock Purdy just got paid. Maybe that can play to their benefit as well. But they ended the season on a 4-game losing streak. So it's kind of tough to put any stock into the 49ers as it is right now. And I almost want to say I'm more confident in the Arizona Cardinals this year. Just quarterback play, wide receiver 1, their offense as a whole, their defense to me for the Cardinals. I got to do more research on them and see what they're looking like. I'm trying to look. The points against, only 379. That was second worst or third best in the division. No, sorry. That was second best in the division, just behind the Seattle Seahawks with 368. So their defense didn't look too terrible last year, but again, that's going to be my big question mark with the Cardinals. I trust their offense. I like Kyler Murray, but we'll have to see how that defense transitions. Whereas for the Seattle Seahawks, it's going to be more offensive, and that's why the Rams are it feels like the for sure thing, just because you can trust the offense for sure to play well, especially with a veteran quarterback like Matthew Stafford, and their defense with Jared Verse being an up-and-coming star as well. I really like the Rams this year, not in just the NFC West, but really the NFC as a whole. Then you look at the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Atlanta Falcons, Carolina Panthers, and New Orleans Saints. Now, this division probably has one of the worst teams in the NFL in the New Orleans Saints, only winning 5 games last year. I don't know what their win total is projected at this year, but it's probably around that, if not less. Tyler Shuck, I believe, their second-round quarterback they drafted this year out of Louisville, he's really not performed in camp so far, and so I'm not expecting too much from the Saints. Carolina, I would assume they would exceed 5 wins this season. They had 5 wins last year. Bryce Young looked to have kind of a resurgence towards the end of last season. Can he keep that momentum going? They won 2 out of 5 and end the season last year. So, for the Carolina, that's pretty solid. So they're looking to at least, I would say, get to around 8 wins. Maybe try to get to 500 this year. That'd be a nice little step to progress. But this is probably a break it or make it year for Bryce Young. He's probably going to have next year if this year is a down year. But then it's become, your next year is the hot seat. So for him, he needs to perform well. I'm rooting for the guy. Hopefully, Andy Dalton doesn't have to go in there and save the day like he did last year. I'm just kidding. Go follow Andy Dalton Muse on X. And then the Atlanta Falcons. This was the team that I predicted, I believe, to win this division last year. Kirk Cousins coming in, a veteran presence. I really felt good. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, he was going to get those guys going. And he kind of did for the first couple games of the season. And then it fell off, and then he got benched, which for Kyle Penix. So, for Michael Penix Jr. So, for Atlanta, I'm assuming Penix is going to be the starter. I haven't seen too much different from him or from the news outlets reporting anything different. And so, do I expect this team to be better than they were last year? I kind of want to say it's going to be a similar season. I have to look at their schedule. They ended the year on a 2-game losing streak, winning 2 out of 5, 4-5 at home, which, it's, for a 1 game below 500 team, it's just like, dang, you stunk at home, right? But then you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who won the division last year. They were 5-4. So none of these teams are really dominant at home. And so that can really prove to be beneficial for some of the teams to steal some road games. The Buccaneers were 5-3 on the road. That's a good record to have on the road. But again, I like the Tampa Bay Bucs with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin Jr. is coming back. They just drafted Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. That offense, Bucky Irving, that offense will be solid. Their defense, again, is just going to be the big question mark. They had the least points against, though, in the division with 385. The next closest was the Saints at 398. So, again, I like this team. The Bucs, I would say they're maybe a little bit less than just the Rams because of the Rams' defense. For the Bucs, I don't know if I can trust their defense as much as I can the Rams, but still, I mean, Baker Mayfield, career resurgence in Tampa Bay. He's balling out there. They finished their season winning 4 out of 5. They're coming into this season, feeling pretty good about themselves, I'll say. And then we transition to the NFC North with the Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, and Chicago Bears. Now, this was the best division in football last year with the Lions, Vikings, and Packers all making the playoffs. That week 17, week 18 game between the Lions, Vikings for the division was a great game, but Detroit clearly showed that they were better, and then Minnesota fell in round 1 against the Rams. But it feels a very different division than last year. Ben Johnson going to fix the Bears. Minnesota rocking with J.J. McCarthy, moving on from Sam Darnold. Green Bay Packers kind of feel the same. It didn't really feel like they improved too much this year. And so, 11 wins, I would say 10 wins is really where I see the Packers fitting this year, which isn't a bad thing. I think they kind of, stay the road, especially with how this division, I still feel will be pretty decent. For the Bears, obviously you'd hope they exceed 5 wins. I talked about it on Monday's episode, how important this first handful of games for the Bears is going to be, just in terms of the whole Caleb Williams narrative, but also just gaining momentum for the rest of the season because their back half is pretty tough compared to their first half. But then, obviously, Detroit is going to be the favorite to win this division, the best roster in this division. New coaching. Can Dan Campbell be the guy without his coordinators? I think it might be a rough transition to start the year, and then they'll potentially figure themselves out, or they'll be like the Eagles and start really good, and then you start to see their errors show and falter late. I would kind of predict the latter and them just being, start slow and kind of get it together. But then that second spot in the division standings is up for grabs. I could see I really see it between the Bears and the Packers this year. I don't know what to believe in the Vikings. History would say trust the Vikings, in McConnell as their head coach. He's proven to kind of ride with backup quarterbacks and have them succeed. So, JJ, they drafted him in the first round. Can they, build him up to be a productive quarterback in the league? We'll have to see this season. But I think the Bears have a higher upside than the Vikings this year, but also a much lower floor. So again, that second spot, this is going to be the most interesting division in this entire conference. Obviously, it's going to be spearheaded by the Lions, but is it going to be the Packers, the Bears, or the Vikings to really take advantage of some of the mix-up in the NFC North? That's what I want to hear from you guys. Which team do you think will have the best season out of the Vikings, Packers, and Bears? In the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. And then the NFC East. Our pride and our joy. Just everybody loves this division. Just kidding. With the Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, Dallas Cowboys, and New York Giants. Philadelphia won this division with 14 wins. Washington was the Cinderella of last year with 12 wins, a 12-5 record, really shocking people. Dominant at home with a 7-2 record, finishing the season on a 5-game winning streak, obviously making their berth to the NFC Championship, falling to said Philadelphia Eagles. I think Philly's going to be the exact same. I don't think there's too much fall off. I don't think there'll be a Super Bowl hangover. I just don't see that for this Philly team, especially with the way they play, with Saquon kind of leading the way and then having, really a really nice wide receiver core to, kind of pick up for Jalen Hurts' deficiencies, even though he's still a very capable quarterback in this league. But then, similar to the NFC North, that second seed could really be up for grabs. You could lean towards Washington, but I just saw their depth chart the other day defensively, and I'm just like, that's not too much better than the Cowboys. So, I really don't like. I really only like one team from this division to make the playoffs, and that being the Eagles. I would say it's kind of a spearheaded race between Washington and Dallas for that second spot and really a wild card spot in the overall playoff picture. New York, they could slightly improve, but with everyone in the hot seat and just I just feel a weird tension with the Giants again. But this one's more deadly, I guess you could say, just based off the fact that, Brian Dable might be gone after this year. Russell Wilson's on a 1-year deal. They just drafted Jackson Dart. Is he going to be the guy? But again, their defense, they probably have the second best defense in this entire division, at least from a pass rushing perspective or a front seven possession perspective. So again, I would say I trust Dallas's offense more than all three of Washington, Dallas, and New York's offenses. So I would kind of say I want to prop up Dallas a little bit, but then it's just kind of the defense to me is potentially the worst out of those three, so it evens itself out. Regardless, I only see one playoff team from this division. From the NFC East, from the NFC North, I could see up to 2. From the NFC South, I see 1. And from the NFC West, I see 1. So, at least 1, I should say, like confident. Well, obviously at least 1. But if I were to say probably 2 from the NFC North, potentially even maybe 3. And then my second wild card could potentially go to a team from the NFC South. Probably leaning towards the Falcons. I don't know if I can trust Carolina, and the Saints are going to be bad. So it feels like 2 free wins there, just based off the division as a whole. So let me know what you guys' thoughts on the whole NFC East picture. I'm fairly excited for this season. It feels like, parity's coming back a little bit. Obviously, the Eagles are leading the way for this conference. Everyone's trying to chase their tails a little bit. We'll see if Detroit can bounce back. Obviously, their season last year got derailed by injuries. Tampa Bay, same thing. The Rams kind of always been an inconsistent team, but always felt like they've had a ceiling. Can they break through this year? I do think it's a limited championship contending pool from this conference, whereas in the AFC, it's kind of a little bit more wide open. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to be the team to beat, but in terms of teams you could potentially see winning it all, I think there's more in the AFC than the NFC. And we'll talk AFC either on Friday or sometime next week, giving my thoughts on those teams. But now it's time to move to our biggest news headline that maybe didn't catch your eye. So I want to inform you guys on what happened between the NFL and ESPN. All right, so if you guys missed it in the news, the NFL and ESPN have reached a long-awaited agreement, which is shocking. It felt like this just came out of nowhere, but they've been working on it apparently for the last 3 years. It's a deal that gives the Disney-owned sports network, ESPN, access to the league's media properties. That includes NFL Network and Red Zone, which a lot of people are like, oh no, because the Red Zone is one of the best properties in sports. And NFL gets in return is 10% equity stake in ESPN, which I have some problems with, but we'll get into that in a second. Both these teams announced Tuesday night, they kind of agreed to the deal. It's going to be very interesting to see how this affects, kind of the content of the NFL. So ESPN, what do they get out of this deal? So they would own and operate the NFL's network, right? Along with this traditional paid television distribution, right? When you bought cable or whatnot, you would get ESPN. But it also is coming out with a direct-to-consumer streaming service. So similar to a Netflix or a Disney Plus, ESPN is now launching a ESPN Live or whatever, ESPN cable that you can just subscribe to, and I bet it would be internet-based. And that means you can watch all of ESPN channel, maybe ABC when ESPN's on ABC, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPNU, all the ESPN properties are probably on that direct-to-consumer service, which I think is interesting. All these, companies are coming out with direct-to-consumer services. I don't think this is a bad move on ESPN's part, because why limit yourself to being restricted by cable or even Disney Plus subscribers? So they're making their own thing, which I think is very cool. I don't need to, if you subscribe to, I guess, online-based, satellite companies, those being, a DirecTV stream or, a YouTube TV, you get access to ESPN on those services, so those subscribers wouldn't necessarily move over. But for instance, if I'm just a college kid, right, and I want to watch ESPN, but I don't have any other streaming service, I can pay whatever price they're asking per month, and I'll have access to all ESPN which is a good, and I checked the price, wasn't too expensive. So it seems like a fairly good deal, especially if you like ESPN. But now that means ESPN has the NFL Network and Red Zone. So what does that mean for Red Zone? I don't know. I really don't know. The deal gives ESPN the broad rights to the Red Zone brand, right? So that means ESPN is now the distributor of the NFL Red Zone channel, right? Which is this big one-stop shop for all NFL Sundays. You pretty much just turn on Red Zone and you get to watch all the big plays from the games as they happen live, which is a really cool product, one of the best products in sports. I could literally do a whole podcast episode on how much I love Red Zone. But the key with Red Zone and the big deal that everyone's kind of freaking out about is it's ad-free, right? So it's literally Scott Hansen hosts it, and he does a 7-hour live stream. He used to say 7 hours of commercial-free football, and then last season, that changed a little bit. And it felt like he was just like, now 7 hours of NFL football. And people were like, whoa, commercial. It's supposed to be commercial free. And then apparently they started playing, not ads, but DraftKings, different types of sponsored elements that were technically commercials that they couldn't say anymore. And a lot of fans were getting upset by that. And so with ESPN taking over and overall Disney taking over, what does that mean? Right? When you usually make a deal like this, you can either improve upon it or you try to cash in on it. And so it's pretty scary to see what they can turn Red Zone into. The NFL in return, they pretty much get 10% equity stake in ESPN. The league would retain, some of their properties like NFL Films, NFL Plus, which is their own direct-to-consumer streaming service, its podcast network, and the leagues and individual teams' websites, which wasn't crazy. But that now means NFL fantasy football is going to merge with ESPN fantasy football. If you're an ESPN fantasy football user, which I think a majority of people are, that's big news. I haven't checked it out. I will, this is a side tangent real quick. I'm kind of like a fantasy football guru when it comes to my family. I've helped my brother go back-to-back championships for the last 2 years. I just think I have a God-given gift when it comes to fantasy football. But regardless, so this is going to be an interesting. I got to check it out. I'll give my thoughts on it. Apparently, the app hasn't changed too much. Apparently, it's a little bit better, which is great, right? I think there's other services that have come up when it comes to fantasy football that a lot of fans have kind of flocked to. I won't mention them now for I guess sponsored reasons. I'm not sponsored by anything, but I don't know why I'm not saying it. But that's probably the biggest change immediately that we've seen. So it's going to be interesting. Now, obviously, this also means that I think the NFL is going to put more games on NFL Network, which is going to be on ESPN, I would assume. But let's answer the question, what does this mean for ESPN? ESPN already holds, the rights to Monday Night Football. They produce all the Monday night games. And so, here's the big one. ESPN and ABC have now the rights to carry 2 Super Bowls. The first to conclude the 2026 season. So next year's Super Bowl, I believe, is going to be on ESPN, or at least the season after. It's going to be next season. Next season Super Bowl is going to be on ESPN/ABC, which is the first one in my lifetime, I believe, because it's always been Fox, CBS, or NBC. And so that's kind of the end of the reporting. I mean, the NFL, it seems like they're making moves. But here comes the big question. Is ESPN recently launched, I believe a year or 2 years ago, ESPN Bet. And where you could bet another sports book, right, of the plethora that are out there. But you could bet on NFL games. And so now the NFL owns 10% of ESPN. I'm assuming they would own 10% of the betting, right? So the NFL, Roger Goodell made a statement a couple years ago saying, we don't have any interest in getting into gambling. Well, is that the case now? I haven't read too much on how it's going to impact ESPN Bet, what props are going to be put, right? But that's one area where it's okay, that's kind of sketch with gambling. But then the second part of it could be, how does this affect news from the league, right? Does does the NFL kind of steer what the ESPN kind of talks about of the league now? Do they only try to keep it positive? Do they try to avoid controversy, right? That's going to be another element that could be a long-term effect of this deal. So be a little bit wary about it. ESPN for the last couple of years has kind of fallen off a cliff when it comes to, feels like real journalism of the sport. They kind of just, all these talk shows kind of go for clicks. Meanwhile, I'm informing you guys about this deal, not really giving my opinion on it. I'm just giving a little bit of a caution sign when it comes to, taking ESPN stories from now on about the NFL, just because you don't know what kind of perspective they're trying or bias they're trying to push on you in terms of making it more positive for the league, or at least trying to make you watch something or build something up when it doesn't deserve it. So keep a caution sign when it comes to ESPN regarding the NFL. I wonder how this is going to change technically the talk shows, which is interesting on how those will change. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this ESPN and NFL. I want to say merger, but it's not a merger. The deal they've brokered. I'm fairly interested because ESPN, it feels like they're kind of grabbing everything. They've really been, they're the lead network for college football, right? And they've always kind of been that fourth, player in this NFL mix, right? It's been CBS, Fox, NBC. Oh, it's really been CBS and Fox, being the main two. And then you have NBC on Sunday Night Football, which is a big production. And then you have Monday Night Football from ESPN, which is like, okay, like NFL football's good, or Monday Night Football's fine. No one's like, oh, this is the best broadcast in terms of those four. And then you have Amazon Prime getting it on Thursdays, which that whole production feels almost like a gimmick at times, just because they're trying to make themselves different than the other ones. And then you have the NFL Network, which that now belongs to ESPN. And now you have Netflix doing some games. The NFL is definitely dispersing itself, which is tough. I saw something about the price to watch every NFL game this year, which ended up being like $1,000 or something around that range, which is just absolutely insane to me. And that goes into a whole other area of, piracy and why that's kind of spiking nowadays, just because the NFL is kind of making it tougher for you to watch these NFL games, right? They're making a bag, which is fine, but you're also not, you're not valuing your customers as much in terms of, here's your one-stop shop, right? And you can always subscribe to the NFL Plus, their direct-to-consumer thing for all the primetime games. But, what if you're a Houston Texans fan? You're not always on primetime, right? So how do you watch your teams if they're playing on Netflix? Does that count as a primetime game? I don't know. So it's just little interesting moves by the NFL. They're popular enough to diversify like that and get away with it, whereas other leagues may struggle to do so. So that'll do it for this NFL and ESPN merger. And that does bring us to the end of today's show. Once again, thank you for joining me on this wonderful Wednesday. I'll be back Friday. In the meantime, make sure to follow me on the socials, AJU Sports on X, All Jacked Up Sports on everything else. I would recommend really checking out the Instagram. I'm going to be making it more personal over there as you follow my journey in terms of a one-man crew for this podcast. And if you're listening to this on on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure to leave a like. A rating of 5 stars would be awesome. That could help me out, and that takes you less than a minute, which would be huge. And if you really could, text a friend, show them this podcast. It's nice, chill, less than an hour. You could listen to this on the ride to work, And so, thank you for joining me once again. I'm Jackson James. This has been You Don't Know Jack. Hopefully, you'll know a little bit more Jack than you did today. Anyways, I'll see you guys on Friday.